We recently caught up with Alastair Campbell and Rory Stewart of The Rest is Politics at the launch of the KPMG Board Leadership Centre in Ireland. To set the scene, KPMG's Ryan McCarthy tells us a little about the Board Leadership Centre and the benefits it provides for board members of large corporates, PLCs, semi-states and sizable family businesses.
We are acutely aware of the volume of information and noise that boards are being confronted with on an ongoing basis. So one of the things that we're trying to do is help boards and help board chairs inform themselves better on how to make better decisions and distill effectively what's really important into that decision-making process.
The Board Leadership Centre has launched at a time of heightened scrutiny of the role of the board and on the importance of corporate governance. We began our conversation with Alastair Campbell and Rory Stewart by asking what they consider to be the components of good risk management.
Being clear in your analysis as to what is most likely to affect you. And also I think accepting sometimes you're going to be wrong. And that's why you need people who are going to be thinking in maybe less conventional ways than most people are going to think.
Every time I look at charities or businesses or government, what I notice is the huge optimism bias. The tendency of institutions to think it's not going to happen on my watch, and when the signs are unmistakably coming down the track towards you, the tendency of everybody to say, oh, well, it won't be too bad, we'll be able to handle it. You desperately need people in an organization who are prepared to talk about what could be really bad and set up a unit to deal with that worst case.
Geopolitical risk has also hit the board agenda in a significant fashion in recent years. But has this type of risk really changed? Or is it essentially the same issues repeating themselves?
Yes, every generation has had massive problems, but I don't think we've ever had it quite like this. At a time when we don't really seem to have the quality of leaders in the world that are necessarily going to take us out of it properly.
I certainly think it's true that every generation is faced with unbelievable complexity, but the successful businesses are those that understand the complexity and risk of their age. So yes, we live in a very difficult world, a lot of difficult stuff going on, but it's different.
So what do board members need to pay more attention to now that might not have previously been on their radar?
It is a world in which understanding politics becomes important in a way that it wasn't in the 1990s. In the 1990s, there was much more of a consensus around economic systems, political systems, and therefore there was more certainty, more predictability.
With such a change a major feature of what boards are coping with, what focus should boards be putting on diversity of thinking?
So actually I think the role of a board member, not necessarily the role of a board, but in each board ought to have somebody there who comes along and says, hey, you know what, we're all talking about this, but what about this and what about that? And I think to get people thinking, and you know, I don't think the role of the board is to run the company. It's to give direction and guidance and learning and skills to the people who are running the company.
Really the question is, what's the best board for running this thing and delivering the product? And the answer will be, I think, having people who have varied experiences, but above all who take responsibility. What you don't want is a board full of charming, polite people who look the part, but actually don't have the slightest clue what's going on inside the organization and aren't really contributing to the organization. So yes, of course, diversity of all sorts can be helpful, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, but above all, diversity of thought. You need some ornery people in that room who are prepared to say, this is nonsense.
So I think getting that diversity is not just a question of saying, we need more women, we need more people of colour. I think you do need that kind of thing. But it's actually saying, well, what mindset have they got? What perspective have they got?
So what message is there for those who might say that board diversity is primarily about governance and quotas, rather than such diversity of thinking?
You might have a company that thinks, do you know what, we need an identical group of white men who are all a bit like us and they all dress the same and talk the same and went to the same schools and universities. There's lots of people who probably think that's still the right thing to do. But I think the whole point of the word diversity in a way is it's so wrapped up in this whole ridiculous debate about woke and all the nonsense that gets said about that. All diversity means, to me, is that you're bringing different sorts of people to try to address problems and challenges that everybody is facing.
It's not enough to be diverse to be a good board. However, good effective boards often include diversity. And there are unbelievable number of highly effective, professional, dedicated people from ethnic backgrounds, gender backgrounds, class backgrounds who were not previously included. A huge array of talent, which was not included when middle-aged white men ran boards. And your company will be better for tapping that talent. But it's not sufficient. It's definitely not sufficient. In the end, the real question is, what is the judgment, what's the character, what's the toughness of those individuals on the board?
Whilst the message is clear that diversity takes many forms, in an era of information overload, where should boards be going for insight?
I have a motto, read books, not newspapers, listen to music, not the news. We're in such a news culture, it's impossible not to know kind of what's happening in the world. If you've got a bit of curiosity about you don't have to spend all your day buried in a newspaper to do that. But you'll get a lot more, I think, to give food for thought for other people that you may be trying to advise and help if you're actually saying to them, hey, have you read this book?
If there is one thing that those responsible for getting the right people for the board should consider, what might that be?
Again and again, the central question is time. It's the one thing that we never talk about enough. I'm always being approached to go on boards, and whatever happens, they always say, oh, don't worry, it's only going to be a day a month, or if I'm going to be a chair, it's going to be 2 days a month or 3 days a month. You can't generally be a really good board member if you're not prepared to put in the time. And so I think I would be very, very careful hiring people who have full-time chief executive positions and believing they're really going to be able to put the time in on your board. I would be cautious of hiring people who are on 7 boards already. That may be reassuring, but it might imply they don't really have the time for your board.
Board members face a range of often complex challenges in helping them drive the board agenda. To sum up, we asked Ryan McCarthy of the Board Leadership Centre what, in his experience, are the characteristics of successful boards.
Apart from building good teams and building good capability on boards, I think one of the things that I've been struck by in recent years is that one of the characteristics of successful boards is the ability of boards and companies to learn from the lessons of the past. So an example that I would give is that a lot of companies learned very hard lessons out of the global financial crisis, but the ones that learned those lessons and took them seriously were better equipped to deal with the pandemic. And equally, the ones that learned from some of the lessons or some of the shortcomings they had when they were confronted with the pandemic, I'd say, have been also the ones that have been able to deal with things like supply chain issues, increasing fuel costs, and some of the other issues maybe arising out of the Russian-Ukraine situation. So I would say that's one characteristic that boards actually probably don't consider in terms of their own development, but certainly I think that companies who learn those lessons and implement change in the back of them are better prepared to confront risk and issue as they go forward.